why not renounce your titles as Duke and Duchess?
And what difference would that make?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What's it gonna take to get rid of those pesky titles from Meghan Markle and Prince Harry? So according to a YouGov poll, 44% of the British public believe that Prince Harry should be stripped of his royal titles. But which title should be stripped exactly? Because as many of you already know, Prince Harry and by extension Meghan Markle have more than a few titles attached to their names. In this video, we're going to take a detailed look into just what it takes to strip each of their titles, if at all possible, and the likelihood of it actually happening. Upon his birth in 1984, Prince Harry was gifted the title Prince, as per the letters patent of 1917, which stipulates that the children and grandchildren of the current sovereign are entitled to a HRH styling along with their princely title. And as we all know, upon her marriage in 2018, Meghan Markle's lifelong dream, feminist that she is, of becoming a princess came to be. Now, there is a general misconception that Meghan and Harry have been stripped of their HRH styling post-Megxit, but that is inaccurate. The truth is they basically were prohibited from using it, from referring to themselves in that way, which, as we all know, they have at times gone out of their way to use it anyway. So HRH and the title of Prince are technically gifts from the monarch. And as such, they are capable of being stripped away by the monarch without going through parliament or being challenged in court, because the royal prerogative of this conferral or gift is said to be unreviewable or non-justiciable. So this is actually the easiest title to be removed from Prince Harry, and then of course by extension Meghan Markle, because she wouldn't even be Princess Meghan, but rather Princess Henry. And yeah, I bet pigs will fly before she actually refers to herself as anything other than Princess Meghan. But as it currently stands, it doesn't seem as though King Charles has any intention of doing this, because we all know Prince Harry's his son. He is a prince of the blood, as it were, and I suppose they think he deserves to keep it. In terms of his children automatically becoming prince and princess upon the death of the late Queen Elizabeth, may she rest in peace, I actually don't know. I couldn't find an answer as to whether they would automatically lose their titles if the prince title has been stripped of their father. Logic would dictate that that would happen, but again, I'm not sure if the king has to release a new letters patent to reflect this, or if it just happens automatically. If anyone does know, feel free to let us know in the comment section. Now, before we get into the far more complicated issue of the peerages that they have, let's quickly address Prince Harry's knighthood, a title which I noticed almost everyone doesn't talk about, probably because, like me just a couple of days ago, not many people knew about this. On the 4th of June 2015, Harry was appointed as a Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order. Appointments in the Royal Victorian Order are conferred as a gift by the monarch for services to the monarch or the royal family at large. And so just like the princely title and the HRH honorific, this too, presumably, can be taken away relatively hassle-free. It wasn't created by statute, and therefore it doesn't need to be annulled or removed by statute. So assuming that he lost all of his peerages and his princely title, this knighthood would leave him as Sir Henry, and Meghan would be Lady Mountbatten-Windsor, not Lady Meghan, and most definitely not Lady Sussex, assuming they've been stripped, as I said, of their dukedom. But just like the princely title, we all know that hell will freeze over before Meghan Markle doesn't refer to herself as Lady Meghan. Now, on to the most complicated titles of the bunch, the peerages. So Prince Harry has 3 peerages, In order of seniority, we've got the Dukedom of Sussex, we've got the Earldom of Dumbarton, and we've got the Barony of Kilkeel. And all have been gifted to him, and of course by extension Meghan, by the late Queen as a wedding gift. Just an aside, because this occurred to me as I was researching, does everyone remember how in 2019 Meghan and Harry proclaimed to the world that their son Archie wouldn't be the Earl of Dumbarton because A, they wanted him to have a normal existence and without a title, but B, because the title itself sounded too dumb. I mean, if that doesn't highlight just how immature they both are. My God, your son was practically offered an earldom as per custom because the firstborn son gets the second most senior title from the father. And they rejected it based on the fact that the word Dumbarton was too close to the word dumb. What are we, in primary school? Regardless, we all know why now, because they were interested in grabbing those prince and princess titles for their children. So much for not wanting to give them titles to assure them a normal life. Now here's the interesting thing. The late Queen conferred this title upon Harry and Meghan, once again by exercising the royal prerogative created by the letters patent, just like the princely title. And because Harry is a member of the royal family, this prerogative power was exercised without ministerial approval. However, for some strange reason, despite the fact that it was gifted without Parliament being involved and without an act of Parliament, a statute, the common belief and the common advice is that it cannot be removed without an act of Parliament. So for instance, by creating a bill or a statute that provides the monarch or Parliament or whomever, a committee, with the powers to strip a peer, as dukes and viscounts and barons and whatnot are known as, of their peerage. And the last example of this was actually done during World War I in 1917, when Parliament created and passed the Titles Deprivation Act with the sole purpose of depriving enemy peers and princes of British dignities and titles. Now this act was only used once during World War I, and it resulted in the removal of titles from 4 individuals at the time for bearing arms against Great Britain. And based on my research, no such act or bill or anything was ever passed since then. So that's over a century at this point. In fact, I did a bit of a deep dive because I'm a history buff, and I looked into centuries worth of royalty, British royalty specifically, because I want to compare apples with apples. I know that in Denmark, we've had grandchildren being stripped of their titles, but that's a different system altogether, so it wouldn't really be a fair comparison. But in British history, there have been countless royals, queens even, kings, charged with treason, thrown in the Tower of London, and eventually executed, and they still weren't stripped of their titles. They were executed, imprisoned as royalty. So it seems to be something that is really not done. There seems to be no historical precedent for stripping titles from British royalty, especially if they're royal by blood, as Prince Harry is. And if you want an even more recent comparison, and I mean relatively recent because we're talking, the past 1,000 years, we've got the former King Edward VIII, the Duke of Windsor. He wasn't stripped of his dukedom. In fact, he was conferred the dukedom in exchange for his abdication so that he can marry Wallis Simpson. And they retained those titles despite the fact that they were known Nazi sympathizers. And of course, that would qualify, I would guess, technically as an enemy of Britain, except they didn't actively, the Duke didn't actively fight in the war, so he didn't technically bear arms against Great Britain. But they made no secret of the fact that they were not only friendly with Hitler, but they sympathized with his cause. And they still retained their titles. So yeah, it just seems to me that it really isn't the done thing. And I wonder whether this lack of historical precedent is what's keeping everyone paralyzed. It's almost like, we've never really done this other than that one exceptional time during World War I, where they fought against Britain, but otherwise, it just isn't the done thing. But circling back to the original dilemma, I suppose, why is something that has been conferred as a gift without ministerial approval so difficult to get rid of and arguably only able to be stripped with an act of parliament? Well, despite the fact that that is the commonly held belief and probably what King Charles has been advised, Master Graham Zellick, an expert whose credentials are long enough to fill an entire paragraph and whose words I am heavily relying on for this video, claims that there is good reason to doubt that this view is correct. Firstly, in relation to people referencing the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917 and saying, see, they had to create an act of parliament to strip these people of their titles, he says that it shouldn't be used as precedent because firstly, the scope of the legislation, so what it was meant to cover, the situations it was meant to cover, was very narrow. You had to be an enemy who fought against Britain in the war. World War I, by its very nature, was a very specific instance in history, and it would be far-fetched, and I agree with this, by the way, from a legal perspective, to consider the creation of this statute as precedent for the notion that these things can only be done through an act of parliament. And secondly, it also provided for the removal of princely titles, which we know today can be done without an act of parliament. So very valid arguments being raised here as to why the creation of that one act in a very trying and specific scenario shouldn't be seen as a historical precedent for how to proceed in the future. There's also the fact that there are two subcategories of peerages. There's a life peerage and there is a hereditary peerage. The former, a life peerage, which Prince Harry does not have, is created by statute under the Life Peerages Act of 1958 and therefore can only be removed by an act of parliament. So it's clear as day. There's no ambiguity. It says it right there in the legislation. But the latter, the hereditary peerage, which Prince Harry does have, is not created by an act of parliament. It doesn't exist under a statute. It's, as you'll remember, conferred as a gift under the royal prerogative. And so it really begs the question, if a title is gifted outside of legislation, it simply comes into existence because the monarch wishes it to and signs off on it, then why can't the monarch simply remove it, revoke it if certain situations arise which would warrant such a course of action? Now, there are three main reasons being put forth as to why these titles can't just be removed as easily as they have been conferred. Number one is because in hereditary peerages, there would presumably be a line of ex-Dukes of Sussex, and if you were to remove the peerage, annul it, revoke it, then it could posthumously affect, the stature of these people, even though they're dead, and I don't think they care, but it would basically alter history. That's kind of strange to me because I would have thought that the Dukedom of Sussex would still exist. It just wouldn't have Harry and Meghan as the Duke and Duchess, as opposed to annulling it, deleting it completely, but we're getting above my pay grade here. Did you know that there was only one previous Duke of Sussex? Prince Augustus Frederick, the ninth child of King George III and his wife Queen Charlotte, became the Duke of Sussex in 1801. Interestingly, Meghan Markle is actually the first Duchess of Sussex, despite the fact that Augustus Frederick married twice. First, Lady Augusta Murray, daughter of the Earl of Dunmore, whom he married without the consent of the king, which was illegal under the Royal Marriages Act of 1772. And so the marriage was annulled by the Prerogative Court in 1794, though they still continued to live with each other and they had 2 children. Then in 1831, he married a second time, again without the consent of the king, this time to Lady Cecilia Buggin, daughter of the Earl of Arran. Since the Duke's 2 marriages were considered illegitimate, his children were deemed illegitimate for the title, and thus, upon the Duke's death in 1843, the title became vacant until May of 2018, when it was gifted to Prince Harry upon his marriage to Meghan Markle. The second reason is because in the past, when you're a peer, you also become a member of the House of Lords. Now, since the House of Lords Act of 1999, that is no longer the case. Removing a member from the House of Lords would require an act of Parliament, but seeing as Prince Harry was never a member of the House of Lords, this doesn't apply either. So finally, we have the only remaining reason being that technically a dukedom is property, and so it shouldn't be possible to strip or remove or deprive a person of their property in such an informal manner as revoking it or altering letters patent. It should involve parliament, statute, legislation. But the thing is, I don't know the technicalities of this. And Master Zelig seems to think that this shouldn't apply either. But if you have other ideas, chime in. As far as I'm aware, I don't know or believe if Prince Harry and Meghan actually own anything in regards to the Dukedom of Sussex. Are they landlords in the same way that Prince William is, working on the Duchy of Cornwall and he's technically the landlord and he reaps billions, from it? I don't think the same applies in this situation. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are no longer working royals and do not benefit at all from the crown purse or from any income from Great Britain. I mean, heck, they don't even have a home in the UK. So this final reason, which would have been the only viable reason really, also doesn't seem to apply. You can't deprive someone of something they never had or they don't have. So after all of this digging, it seems to be that there simply doesn't seem to be enough historical precedent to dictate what to do in these situations. When a pair of royals go rogue, when they bring disrepute and dishonor upon their country and their monarchy, it just doesn't seem to be a thing that the British monarchy has ever had to deal with in the past. And if they did deal with any of these problems, it would have been by throwing them in the tower and declaring, "Off with their head!" But that's not how things work nowadays, is it? So it seems to me that it's not a hard and fast rule that this has to be done through Parliament. Perhaps it is just a matter of, we'll just, release new letters patent and declare that so-and-so are hereby stripped of their dukedom, their earldom, their barony, whatever it is, because of so-and-so. In all likelihood, I don't believe any of this is going to happen simply because King Charles just loves his darling boy, and also potentially because he's being advised that this is just not possible. It's very complicated. It's, a matter that will probably give the Sussexes more credence in the sense that they've been singled out and this has never been done before. People have committed treason before and their titles haven't been removed. People have sympathized with the Nazis before and their titles haven't been removed. So why us? Whether it would make an actual difference, that's an entirely different story, because at this point, Meghan and Harry have made such a mockery of the title that it really holds no weight. I mean, they have openly allowed others to mock the title to their faces.
Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. Duchess of Sussex is hard to say. Duchess of Sussex.
Say 5 times fast.
Duchess of Sussex.
And they simply laughed along because that's what they've relegated it to. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are a joke. As you all know, Prince Harry is currently fifth in line to the throne. He's still very much in the line of succession, as are his two children, which is very bizarre, seeing as they have absolutely no knowledge or connection of anything to do with the royal family and the UK at this point. Granted, they're very young and they could grow up and show an interest and perhaps even want to be a part of the royal family, but as it stands, it is very bizarre to see them there, especially when you think about how much Prince Harry despises the monarchy and despises his country. I mean, what kind of a king would he be? A king who hates, so openly hates, his own country and people. It makes no sense, as it stands, for him or his children, for that matter, to be included in the line of succession. However, is it possible to remove them from it? This too hasn't been done much in history. However, it has been done. There is precedent. Firstly, we know of the Duke of Windsor, formerly King Edward VIII, who, upon his abdication in 1936, gave royal assent to His Majesty's Declaration of Abdication Act, which excluded him and any of his future children that he might have had with Wallace from the line of succession. So clearly this was done through legislation, through an act of parliament. So we know that the line of succession can only be altered through an act of parliament. The relevant act in this situation is the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013. Now, much more recently, in 2003, I mean, I say it's recent, I was just a child and it was 20 years ago, 21 years ago at this point. What is time even? But in 2003, Lord Downpatrick, who was the grandson of the Duke of Kent and the Queen's cousin, was confirmed into the Catholic Church, and so he automatically lost his place in line to the throne, because whomever is in the line of succession has to be a member of the Church of England. And that makes sense because the king or queen, the sovereign, is the head of the Church of England. There's no other way about it. And then 5 years later, his sister, Lady Marina Windsor, did the same thing. Interestingly, in 1978, Prince Michael of Kent married a Catholic, and at the time, it was enough grounds to remove him from the line of succession, which did happen. But then, thanks to the Succession to the Crown Act, that was reversed, and he and his children have since resumed their place in the line of succession. I looked through the legislation, and as it stands, there aren't any provisions that are relevant to Meghan and Harry, really. I mean, unless Harry denounces his religion and is no longer a member of the Church of England, it doesn't look like there's any avenue to strip him or remove him from the line of succession under this act. Whether they come up with a new act or a bill or another mechanism to remove him is to be seen. I just think purely from a logical perspective, why would you want to have someone who despises his own country in the line of succession? I mean, experts say that Parliament's not going to bother with removing him because he's so far down the line anyway. But as Meghan Markle allegedly once famously said, they're only one Wales plane crash away from the throne. And that's it. It was a bit of a more technical video. I do hope you learned something. I know I did, because I've always been wondering, what's the answer? Everyone keeps, saying different things. And the answer is there is no answer because nobody knows. At this point, that's what the situation seems to be. So let me know what you think should happen. I think the primary thing should be removal from the line of succession. The titles, to me, are meaningless because they've made them meaningless, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what yours is, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.